I'm Elliot Reeves, this is Tad Hargrave, and you're watching The Elliot Reeves Show. Tad, thank you so much for being here. It's brilliant to have you.
It's good to be back. How long ago was it we did our conversation?
That's a great question. It has to have been at least a year and a half, I would think.
Mm-hmm.
I always try and think of it numerically. So where you were in the order, I'm on about 77 at the moment. And I'm thinking that you were in the 40s. I want to say mid-40s. I could be completely wrong. So yeah, on that basis, yeah, I think it was something like that. But yeah, the conversation that we had was absolutely amazing. I really, really thoroughly enjoyed it.
Me too.
It was funny because there was a lot of questions that I asked, and you were probably the first guest that I have ever had that pushed back on some of the actual questions that I asked. I found that really interesting. That really helped my personal growth and my growth as an interviewer.
Okay.
I wasn't accustomed to that. So for anyone, if this is the first time of them, hearing you speak, how do you go about introducing yourself these days?
I mean, I suppose on the professional level, I run a business called marketingforhippies.com. I help hippies figure out how to market their stuff better. That's my main, that's where the money comes from.
Yeah.
And then I suppose on the side, I also do a lot of writing or thinking about racism and whiteness and how did white people become white. And there's just increasingly a lot of thinking for me about, I don't know what to call it really, cultural healing, cultural redemption work. There's this bigger picture of how do you, there's so much, sickness in this culture, and it's been individualized. It's been turned into personal pathologies, whereas it might be better understood as a collective something. So for example, in Canada, we've got, or had, residential schools for the Indigenous people. There were things like that in Scotland, for the sons of the Highland chiefs and the tinkers, the traveling people, put in their own separate schools. And they weren't usually, well, for the tinkers especially, they weren't great schools. And so for Indigenous people in North America, there were a lot of these, and the real philosophy of it was to, same here as in Scotland, is you're trying to get the Indigenous out of them. You're trying to modernize them. Mm-hmm. They don't speak their language. You cut their hair, all that stuff. And so there's a lot of trauma that came out of this because there was a lot of abuse by the priests of the children who went there. And so this has been called, residential school syndrome. But I read a piece called by a guy named Darian Thera, I think Beyond the Four Waves of Colonization. He talked about how he said there are these three waves initially of colonization, of a kind of, you take the land, then there's a cultural colonization, then there's a administrative sort of, okay, well now you're under the Indian Act and we're going to choose who the representatives are and all this instead of the ones the culture itself might put forward or endorse, or understanding that the culture might not have ever had fixed chiefs, might not have ever had people in those roles. He said, but there's this fourth wave of colonization, and ironically that wave of colonization is the treatment is the therapy that these Indigenous people get. And he just wondered out loud about this. He said, why is it that, when we say residential school syndrome, we're trying to put our finger on some sort of pathology, some sort of a cluster of symptoms. Something's wrong with a person. Something's broken inside because of what happened. And of course, nightmares and anxiety attacks is part of this. But he said, what if we said that residential school syndrome was this urge to take kids away from their families and beat them when they spoke their own languages? What if that was the pathology? And what if the response to it was just a normal human reaction to this sort of oppression? Mm-hmm. And so in that way, people have a personal, and then of course the end goal of all of this therapy is that they are now well adjusted to live in white society. The very culture that colonized them now, Mm-hmm. And so I wonder about that a lot, of how these things that are so generally oppressive, how as humans we live in a culture that's so far removed from our genetic evolution and how we would have culturally known ourselves for most of our existence. We live in a culture that's so against that. And I think then we personalize a lot of the maladies of this and imagine it, well, it's just me. Something wrong with me. I'm broken. Yeah, you know, you're speaking about your guest with struggle with addictions of various kinds. You know, and don't we all in this culture at this time? And so it's just easy to think I'm broken, but maybe there's actually something culturally that's going on.
Yeah.
So that's how I would introduce myself.
Yeah. Jeez. We can get very deep very quickly, which I really, really enjoy. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, where do you think we are in terms of, you know, in the space of human history, how severe is the present time versus how things have been in the past?
Well, you know, on one hand, you could say every generation has thought the end of the world was coming at some point.
Yeah.
You know, and you can trace this back in the year 1000 and, you know, having a lot of priests made a lot of money on this racket of convincing everyone the end of the world's coming. So there is that, but it is, of course, bad. I mean, if you look around for signs of the end times, they're everywhere. People predicting the end of fish in the oceans by 2048. You know, that huge island of plastic, the rise of the smartphone and what this is doing to us all, but particularly young people, and the devastation on self-esteem. And it's become a very insane time. Ecosystems are genuinely unraveling, and we're not in climate change. We're in a deep climate crisis, climate destabilization. It's not just global warming. Everything's getting warmer. That's happening, but the consequence of that, I mean, I could go on. So yeah, I think it's very bad. And, you know, and I suppose then the question becomes, well, what's the nature of the malady? You know, if we're going to have a prescription. And I guess this is probably what a lot of the conversations are about at their core is what's going on. Is this a lack of innovative technology? Is this we're thinking inside the box? Is this some other thing? You know, what is happening that keeps driving this? Because I think our understanding of that is what's going to determine the solution, you know, and which I have none. I'm in despair about it a lot of the time. It's utterly overwhelming to sustain the gaze on what's happening. And I don't think we're built to do it in a lot of, you know, it's that level of information coming so fast on social media. You know, just scroll through your Facebook and get depressed as hell immediately. So I think it's pretty bad myself. Yeah.
You post a lot of incredibly thought-provoking things on your Facebook pages with other, you know, memes and quotes and all sorts of really good stuff. How do you go about actually curating that content?
I suppose I've just curated the people I follow. So there's just a lot of resharing of things I've come across over the years. Yeah, I suppose that's been one of my responses. You know, maybe the best response would just be to get off Facebook. All of us get off. Maybe that would be the better thing. I mean, I try to share things that I think are positive or uplifting or thought-provoking, and I try to stay away from sharing just the signs of the end times. I collect them privately. You know, I've got a little album, photos on my under my albums on Facebook, signs of the end times. It's there. There's plenty. So I see them. I'm tracking. But I don't know if it's helpful right now to share that, you know, when there's already so much. So I try to focus on what might be possible or some other vision.
So what do you think are the things that are within your immediate control that you can positively influence that then causes a greater magnitude of positivity?
You mean like what are the types of things that me personally or just as people that we have at our disposal that can make the biggest difference?
Well, I mean, yeah, I suppose one might feed into the other, but yeah, you personally, what are the things that you think you can try and help with?
Yeah, boy. Again, I mean, I feel baffled, and I imagine, like a lot of people, the sense of not doing enough, wishing there was more that could be done or that I could do. I'm happy with the marketing business because I get to work with good people doing good things and help them be more effective.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that we need to be better at spreading the word about some of these alternatives. And most of the people who do it are not that good at it. And so then nobody knows that the alternative even exists. And so it functionally doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important that people see people succeeding at some level doing these things that they love and that are healing or redemptive or restorative to the world. Because otherwise they just stay in their job at the corporation. Why leave? There's no other alternative. Nobody's making any money. Nobody's able to sustain themselves. So that feels like it's such a small part of the puzzle. But that's one. And then the stuff around whiteness. I just see so much terrible behavior. And this isn't to demonize white men. It's not this at all. And around conversations about racism on Facebook, that's where I see most of the terrible behavior coming from. I know white women, there's trouble there too. I mean, there's that. But that's just been something I've been called to do, to how do we, and a lot of the stuff I write about, it's not talking about racism. I've never experienced racism really, so I don't know how much I have to say about it. I've not been on the receiving end of it. One can read about it. One can read people's accounts of it, people of color, indigenous people. But the thing I do feel some qualification to speak to, or at least some need to speak to, is the way that we approach the conversation. Because there's so much trolling. And that's fundamentally what I see from a lot of white men on Facebook. Not all, of course, but it's enough that it's visible. Is there's a really poor manner of approach to the conversation. It's a kind of swaggering, hey, I got something to say. Let me throw a devil's advocate. And what do you think about this? And just baiting and trying to get a reaction and all of this. And so I've even gotten to the point where I don't tend to even get into the conversation with people. I don't tend to talk about racism directly, because if you say, well, if I say to somebody, look, racism is a thing, and they say, no, it's not really anymore. I say, well, no, white privilege is a thing. No, it's not. But here's some proof. And they'll just say, well, here's some proof. I say, well, I've got a lot more. They'll say, I have a lot more. Well, here's some stuff from people of color. Well, here's some stuff from people of color. It's bottomless. There's no end to this. And I finally realized it's not actually the needed thing. The needed thing is or I don't know if the needed thing, but the thing I felt drawn to and seems useful is instead to speak about the way that they're even broaching the conversation. So for example, though it's not about racism, but it's a similar thing. I posted some article about Bernie Sanders. I'm a fan. And somebody posted, who I don't know, just said, GFL, asshole. I just had to look up in Urban Dictionary. It means good fucking luck.
That's the first time I've heard that.
Yeah, and it was the first time I'd heard from him. I had never met this guy in my life. And so this is just trolling. This is blatant. This isn't a difference of opinion. This isn't, let's have a stimulating conversation about this.
Yeah.
And so what I've started to do, I did with him, is I just tagged 3 of our mutual friends. I saw we had about 30 mutual friends. I tagged them and I said, hey, your friend has a funny way of saying hello. Do you want to speak to him about this? And then he wrote somewhere else. He didn't respond to that, but he wrote somewhere else some other comment. I said, hey, good to see you again. I noticed you misspelled Tad. I'm so sorry for approaching you with such a rude, inconsiderate behavior. I hope there's a way I can make amends. And I tagged 3 more people. And I just said, look, this is the game now. Every time you do this, I'm just tagging more people.
Yeah.
And I could do this all day. And it's not punishment, it's not, but there is I don't know if it's accountability or
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
This kind of behavior it's not proper. It's not good. And I think, maybe this is something about the times we're in, is people feel genuinely kind of unsubstantial. People don't, it's like the bull in the china shop. I don't know how aware of their movements they are and the consequences that they cause.
Mm-hmm. And
so people saunter into these, I've often said, particular conversations around race, but I imagine there's other places this applies. It's a minefield, but it's not the kind of minefield where you step on a mine and it explodes. It's the kind of minefield where you step on a mine and other mines explode.
Huh.
And so you step on a mine as a white person in this conversation, and people of color get the shrapnel on it. They're the ones that bear the brunt of it. And we get a little bit and think, oh God, that was really terrible. But we don't know how, what it costs them. So that feels like an important thing for us to consider, or at least I would offer it up, that the way we approach other people, the way we approach conversations, ends up shaping the conversation. That really ends up, it's the conversation before the conversation.
Yeah.
And it's often poor. And then people say, oh, well, there wasn't much of a conversation there. It's like, well, look at the way you came to it.
Yeah. So this is an easy answer to this question, but how should people approach conversations? Should it be with more empathy or dignity, or more, potential understanding of how the other person is going to take it?
Yeah, the word that comes to me is just slowly.
Mm-hmm.
Extremely slowly. Not fearfully, not full of fear, but carefully, full of care. That if one is going to ask a person of color, let's say, to speak about their experiences on racism,
mm-hmm.
which of course never happens. The white person will just often tell them, what their experience is, but it would be something along the lines of, listen, and humility. I think, humility is a big one in this,
mm-hmm.
but it might be something like, look, I don't know what it's like to have been you. I've heard stories, and sometimes I wonder if we're in a different place now, and I just don't know. And I don't imagine you would speak for everyone who looks like you. But I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share, if it's not too expensive for you, if it doesn't cost you too much, if you might be willing to share a little bit of your experience of what it's like to be you, to be alive these days in the skin that you're in. And, I'd be happy to just listen, and then really just listen. But, when it's, whether it's this, or I would just say anytime there's a conversation that's fraught in some way, that there's a conversation that is one of those very sensitive, it's good to start very slowly.
Mm-hmm.
There's a fellow I met who's a Blackfoot fellow in Alberta. And when he'd shake my hand, it was this one of those limp fish handshake, like just his hand went limp. And I was just like, ugh. Which is a real North American perspective. And what I came to realize was the nature of that handshake it's just both people would be doing it like that. And it would be saying, look, we're just meeting, you and I. We don't know each other that well. So let's not make any assumptions about how this is going to go. I'm not trying to make a big impression on you. I can see from the way you touch my hand, you're not trying to make a big impression on me.
Mm.
And, but that's the whole thing in the business world, make a powerful first impression.
Mm-hmm.
But even consider the word impression, you're trying to press yourself into, you're making a dent in someone who you just met.
Mm-hmm.
So instead, this going very slowly, very gently, and just step by step, just to see in these issues. Because if we don't, I just don't see what good comes from it. In Australia, I heard about some gathering. They gathered GMO activists, or anti-GMO activists, and the GMO scientists together. And they had, 4 or 5 days together. I think it was the first 3 days they weren't allowed to reveal which one they were. But they just barbecues and hanging out and conversations about everything except that. So, of course, by the end of 3 days, all this trust had built.
Mm-hmm.
All this goodwill had built.
Mm-hmm.
And from that place, a lot of the anti-GMO activists were able to say, we don't understand the science. We pretend to, but we don't actually understand it. And the GMO scientists were able to say, we have some concerns. Things they would never have said to each other if there wasn't the goodwill. I think this is a very, old human understanding of. I was just actually spending some time with a woman, Linda Williamson, who was the wife of Duncan Williamson, who was one of the traveler people from Scotland, and a lot of his stories, thank God, were recorded, written down, and if you hear a lot of these old stories, when someone goes to visit someone else, somebody goes to visit the king, if they're a good king, or a good host, the very first thing that happens is they're welcomed, they're given the best food and wine. There's a whole conversation, and after a few hours, they say, "So, what brings you here?" So that's a very old something, but of just going slowly.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just get to know each other a bit over food, and over some drinks, and that would be wonderful. But so often, I think there's this desire to jump in and to solve it, and let's get to it. Let's cut to the chase, and it's. I don't see it being helpful, especially if you're in a group that's traditionally been more powerful or more dominant.
Yeah,
there's a real need to go slow and be mindful, and not assume that we're seen as a friend or that we're trusted.
That's really interesting. I had a conversation with someone not terribly long ago, and they said, seemingly this is backed by science, or there's some statistic to say that to have a really close bond with somebody, it's something like 200 or 300 hours. And I was like, gee, I find that quite shocking, because I feel as though I can spend a very limited amount of time with someone, but based on the things that that we are willing to discuss, you can create a very quick and quite deep connection with somebody. But say for yourself, for example, and this is just, I find this quite fascinating, how long do you think it takes for yourself to create a real sort of relationship or friendship with somebody?
Yeah, well, there's a few places I could go with that. One is, and I don't count myself on the other side of this one, but we are in a culture that's really addicted to instant intimacy.
Yeah.
Instant connection, instant. And so you see people go to Tantra workshops, and God bless the Tantra workshops and that they're there. But some people go for the hit, because they get to sit and eye gaze with people, and they get this instant connection. And the notion is, there's this word immediate, and the etymology of it, the I am in the beginning, is this negating prefix, and means not, and then the immediate or medium. So this idea of trying to get rid of what's in between us, nothing in between us. Let's just be connected. Let's just be here. And I'm as guilty of this as anyone. But it's actually, could it be that it's the thing between us that's where our relationship really lives? The word companion literally means it's come and then pain, so with bread. So that's the notion of companionship, is it lives in the bread between you. No bread, no companionship. So the way that we are with the bread, the way that we tend to it, the way that it was, the wheat was grown and harvested, the way it was cooked, and sang to as we cooked it, and the way we treat it and enjoy it and speak to it, and that's our friendship. There's some medium between us that matters, and it's just very easy to think, well, no, but I just want to go for the hit of connection. It's like, yeah, but if you go about the trying to connect in a way that savages the medium between you, very soon there is no connection anymore. So there's a need to keep that alive. Yeah, that's important. I suppose in the same way, we've got this gut bacteria. And this is a mind-boggling thought somebody shared with me the other day, and I never considered it this way. So, all the bacteria in our gut, it's the same as in the soil. But the difference between plants and mammals is they're rooted in that soil, and we carry the soil inside us. And it's very important that we keep it alive, because this gut bacteria, that's the thing that turns your proteins into amino acids. It's what turns your carbs into sugars you can use. So without it, we're dead. There's more of it than there is of us. It's a real signature too. You know, I mean, if they took your gut bacteria, it's just like a fingerprint. They could know, and they could tell where you've been, and all. It's incredible. But then because you like, oh man, well, Coca-Cola is great, and you chug that, and you're getting the hit from it, or drugs or alcohol, then it can kill the bacteria. And well, yeah, you got the hit, you got what you wanted, but you've so fundamentally compromised the gut bacteria, and now your health is at risk. And so then the health of the relationship is at risk. But the other thought that came to me was Michael Meade, long may he live. He's a mythologist and storyteller. And he talked about there's these 3 levels of relationship or community. The first level of community, to me, this could go for the 2 people or a whole group, is just the everyone's in it for themselves. It's kind of this selfish. It's just proximity, basically. People live near each other, but everyone's out for their own benefit. Second level is tit for tat, quid pro quo. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. We make deals, and so there's a real commitment to fairness in this. But as soon as there's any conflict or trouble, it's just it's a house of cards. And he says there's this third level, but the way you get to the third level is through some kind of a crucible experience. So that could be a natural disaster, death, conflict, a birth, but something that is so very much like a crucible. The crucible is that clay pot where you melt the metal. It's something that has that kind of heat to it, that is so fundamentally you can't withstand it. It melts you down. You're not the same as you were when you went into it. And if we don't have that, it never leaves that second level. It's only on and you see this all the time when there's a natural disaster and people say in the town, we've never been so close, and people just helped each other out, and the community was so strong, came together. In war, you hear this all the time. The brotherhood that people feel, in times of war, or sisterhood, and the same thing of going through conflicts. If we're willing to go through it and get to the other side, it's a different relationship. But we live in a very disposable culture.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to, you get into a fight with somebody or somebody does something in a community that's genuinely harmful, but everyone just writes them off and sends them away. And so then it never hits that height. It just always stays transactional. And so I think time does have to do with it. I think that's probably very true. And I think you could spend a lot of time at number 2 and never get to that third level because you're unwilling to deal with the cruise. Oh, there's a natural disaster, we all leave. Oh, there's a fight, we bail. Somebody hurts somebody, we just shun them and banish them.
But how then do you go about forging that third level without there being, a hurricane, or how can you get to that level without there being some sort of extreme or profound experience that transcends the transactional?
Well, I mean, I would direct us back to how this conversation opened about the state of the world.
Yeah.
Oh, if you can't find a crucible, open your damn eyes. If you can't find anything, it's there. Oh, there's plenty.
So something to bond over.
Yeah. I mean, how about ecosystems are dying? Entire countries will find themselves without water. There's one or two. So I mean, there's that, but then there's also I just think it's so constant. It's so everyday. When's the last time? Let's say you someone in a community did something harmful, or there was a conflict between two good people, and you couldn't really figure out whose side to even be on, and so you didn't do anything. And everyone ignored it, didn't want to take sides, and just let it melt down. It's right there. I mean, the whole thing. You want a crucible moment? There it is. Offer to step in, say, hey, I noticed you two are having a hard time. Would you like some help in talking about this? And that's a crucible in a few ways. One is it's a crucible moment to try to become the medium for people. through which they can hear each other.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a crucible. And the other way of the reaction you're likely to get is some people would be grateful and some very defensive, because we live in this, everything's privatized. And one of the most devastating privatizations we have in this culture is the privatization of relationships. So, people get married, and when there's a fight, everyone who's at the wedding who swore that they would be there for that couple to help them through thick and thin are the first people gone. Everyone bails. And the couple is just left to figure it out on their own. It's like, wait, let me get this straight. So this couple's having a fight, yeah? They're really triggered with each other. In the genuine sense of the word, all the childhood, it's all coming up now, and they can't think straight. And the person they're triggered by is the person they're in a relationship with. Right. Okay, and your solution is just let them at it. Let two triggered people just try to figure it out on their own. It's so crazy. And this is why you would have elders, in a community. This is why you would have people who've done all the crazy, did all the selfish, and are at some different stage in their life and can hold some sort of solid ground and help people back towards each other. It's the definition of a healthy community. It's not, I heard this from Stephen, who you'll be interviewing soon, but it's not that nobody's crazy. It's just not everybody's crazy at the same time. So if you're the sane one in the moment, hooray, you've got a job. Help the ones that have lost the plot for a second. Help the ones that are in reaction. Because it's so easy not to. And this just happens all the time. So this question of, well, where do we find these crucible moments? All the time. You see a Facebook thread melting down. Maybe you just send a personal message to one of those people, say, hey, I just wanted to check in. You're saying some very intense things, and that, or if you know some friends who are in a conflict, could you be the one to try to help them bridge it? Help them just hear each other, because maybe you're the one who can see both sides and they can't anymore. Yeah. There's so many chances for this type of thing. Or, a friend of mine, Olenka, bless her, she's a friend of mine from Edmonton. She moved to Australia and she was leaving, and she's just one of these incredible people in the community who's done so much and much loved. And there's a farewell party which she organized herself, which is part of the trouble in a culture of self-sufficiency. People organize their own farewells. But when I showed up, it just, nothing was happening. People were just hanging out. And this is a potential moment for one of these crucibles where we start to acknowledge this one who you claim to love so much is going. You may never see them again. I mean, who knows who even gets home alive tonight? Nothing is a given. But they're traveling to the other side of the world. Who knows if they come back? So this is, you don't hold anything back now. Put this all on the table. And I just asked people, tell her you don't want her to go. Tell her something you don't know about her. And people had a really hard time doing it. Even just admitting there was a part of them that didn't want her to go. Even, willing to admit, well, there's a lot about you I don't know, and I'd like to know it. So, I've done improv for years, and it really struck me in improv comedy and in a lot of the theater world, a lot of milestones aren't celebrated. People join a theater company. There's not a big deal made of it. Somebody transitions from a beginner to intermediate, or intermediate to senior, or senior to alumni, and these things aren't marked. All of these things are moments. I had a friend post on Facebook. She just said, well, my son is getting to a certain age, and I'm just thinking about rites of passage, and there aren't any. And for her she had concerns that maybe he was going to go down this road of just video games and not much of a life like so many men these days. And what could be done about it? And I said, well, pick me up at the airport when I come back home and we'll talk about it. And so she came with her partner, who's not the father. And I said, okay, here's the thing. Any kind of, you're thinking rite of passage, he's 18. It's gone. That's over. That's a 12, into adulthood. 12 years old, around there. I said, but he's still living at home, so there's moving out. So I said, if you've come to me, you've asked me, here's what I would say. He moves out soon. Because he'd been, they were saying, apply for jobs. He said, I'll do it tomorrow, but it would be a week later he would do it. This was, part of the concern was that he was just being pretty lazy about things. So I said, he does, and this happens in 3 to 6 weeks. This isn't in a year. And ideally, the scenario is he gets home one day, door's locked, goes around the back. Some of the older men in his life, which there weren't many, which is part of the issue, are sitting around a fire and saying, oh, hey, yeah, come on over. Hey, why is the door locked? Oh, that's what actually we want to talk to you about. Is there some kind of trouble? No trouble. You know, hey, want some hot chocolate? Great. Chatting for a bit. Fine. So what's going on? Oh, yeah. So you're moving out. No, I'm not. You are, actually. Your stuff has already been packed. And you'll be staying at his place for the next month. What? You know, and the mother wouldn't be allowed in on this. She might be allowed to say goodbye, probably. And then they wouldn't be allowed to talk for 3 months. And of course, at that point, a little bit of money would be given to the kid, help them find a place, help them find a job, help him get furniture, you know, get some sense of style, get his toilet paper that he imagined just appeared out of nowhere as an 18-year-old. And all of this would be done on his behalf. And then at the end of 3 months, his mother would be invited into his place. You know, but as I expressed all of this to the mother, you could see her just overwhelmed, melting down. Oh, that's so soon. That's so... And so nothing happened. Not that it should have. Not that, you know, there's no fingers to point here. But it does point to something in this culture of even when we say we want it, a real avoidance of it when it comes. Or somebody's dying, you know, and good that you're interviewing Stephen, who's done so much work on this. Mm-hmm. Here's this crucible moment. This person is dying. This is the big one. And nothing happens. Everyone just goes on with their life as if nothing's happening. As if that's the achievement, is to not let it mess with your life. And then people die and few days of sadness and then stiff upper lip and get back to it. And what about a culture where you just wear black for a year? Mm-hmm. So there's crucibles all around, I think, but we tend not to go through them. We tend to do everything we can to avoid them. It's such a strange fact of this culture. The very thing that would turn us into more cultured humans, we avoid, and we cling to the things that are culture killing.
Mm-hmm. How do you define culture?
Well, I think it's actually very useful to think about it as very similar to the gut culture thing. So to go back to that. So if it's so mysterious, right? It's the thing that turns the food into nutrition for you, fundamentally. It's in you, but it's not in you, actually. It's in that too. You know, you swallow a marble, it comes out the other side. Mm-hmm. Tried that as a kid and just, wow, it's true. So it's in that, just me? Just, okay, well, just me. Yeah. Don't you judge me. But, you know, it's
too late.
Too well. Yeah, but, you know, there's that tube inside of you, and that's where it's in. Mm-hmm. So it's not in you. It's not your DNA, but you're inconceivable without it. Mm-hmm. It takes all this mess that we eat and converts it to nutrition. So if you have food but no bacteria, you die. Bacteria, no food, you die. So they seem to rely on each other in some mysterious way. Mm-hmm. Okay, so everything I just said, turn that to human culture. Mm-hmm. Except now it's not that the culture's in us. We're actually in the culture. Mm-hmm. And we have these messes that we make in our life. You know, the current Pope said something to young people, said his advice was, go out, make a big mess, and then clean it up. It's good advice. But, you know, the word mess etymologically has connections with food. Mess hall, mess kit. If you go up to northern Scotland, they'll say they're going out to get their messages, groceries, So it's a very similar thing. And I think the word actually has its roots in like a soupy broth, which as soon as, you know, if people have beards, you understand why something that's called a soupy, you know, would be called a mess. Yeah. That's a soupy broth. Immediately registers upon you how those two words could have a connection. But so that's the function of culture, is to eat our messes and turn it into nutrition for us. So if anyone's, because we're in a big talk therapy time, and that's a beautiful thing. But we've all had times where we're stressed out of our minds, and then you go dancing. And you just feel better after, you know, with other people, or singing, or you listen to some old stories, or you're doing crafting together. I was just talking with some folks, and she said that she had a gathering with some women, and they were all doing some sort of crafting, and she said she'd never felt so connected. Just to be doing something, with your hands is a very cultured thing. At the Cayleys in northern Scotland, all around Scotland, maybe it was very common. It's just a visiting session, a party, and a storytelling, and people sing songs. But as all this is happening, people have their drop spindles and they're weaving. People may be working on a little toaster or something. People are doing things with their hands often, and so it becomes very important to consider. And most cultures, let's say in terms of the gut culture, so many cultures around the world have come up with ways to feed this. So the kimchi, the sauerkraut, the kefir, the yogurt, all that. And similarly, cultures have figured out what do you do that could feed the culture that you're in, that keeps it alive. And also, and maybe more importantly, there's an understanding of what do you do that kills it? What is it that hurts that culture? So obviously, nutritionally, I'm not any expert in the gut bacteria, but there's certain things you can ingest that hurt your gut bacteria. Stress hurts the microbiome. And then same in human culture, where stealing, lying, the instinct for revenge, these are fundamentally corrosive and antibiotic to the culture that we live in, which I think is why so many traditional cultures stepped on it very heavily when this stuff would happen, because you could see how it would spiral out. So there was a fellow friend of mine, Minister Faust, who's got a podcast as well, which name I can't remember, but in Edmonton, and he was interviewing a fellow, Rex Tallboy, who's a Cree rapper, and Rex was talking about this chief he'd heard about, where somebody from another tribe had killed this chief's son. And of course, everyone in that chief's tribe is gearing up. And, I don't know the thoughts of this chief, but I could imagine him seeing this and saying, oh, I see where this is going to go. It's going to be an eye for an eye. They're going to go get revenge, and it's going to be a civil war for generations. It just spins out so fast. You think you're just going to go kill one person, but then, you get discovered, and now there's, more people die, and all of a sudden, that's very hard to resolve. So he himself went to the other tribe. He found the man that killed his son, and he adopted him as his son. So now you can't kill him because that's your chief's son now. And this type of thing would happen often with tribes where you killed somebody, and one of the solutions was they would adopt you into the tribe, and you would now do the job of that person you killed. So it's, dissuade people from doing it.
Wow.
But there's also just a functional thing. Well, he did work we needed, so now you're that person. But there's a real restorative something there that's going on to try to blunt the impulse for revenge. Or another one was, if that tribe realized, oh man, we screwed up, they killed the chief's son, and this is going to be a lot of trouble, they would bring so much of what they had of their material culture, the tanned hides and the beaded necklaces and the tools and bows, and they would come and give them as gifts. They would pretty much bankrupt themselves to the other community. But why? To blunt that impulse for revenge, just to show them, we know we can't replace this person who's gone, but this is what we're willing to do to try. There's a beautiful story in a book called Jack and the Devil's Purse. It's a Duncan Williamson story, and this story is called the Beaten Stick. And the very short version of it is it's a Jack tale, like Jack and the Beanstalk, Jack the Giant Killer. But Jack and his mother live together, and they have a pretty good life. Jack works as a butcher, and he every day brings home a lot of good meat, and they eat very well. And before bed, she'll tell him some good stories. And one day he comes home from his work, and she seems sort of upset. He says, "What's going on?" I said, "Oh no, it's nothing. There's nothing. No, don't give me nothing. You're upset about something. I just been thinking about my sister." "You have a sister?" "Oh yeah, I do. And I haven't mentioned her because, well, she's been gone a long time now. She left 40 years ago. She got a name for being involved in the dark arts, and I didn't want you to think that there was anything bad happen in our family." And he says, "What, the dark arts? There's no such thing as the dark arts. He said, well, anyway, she got a name for it, and she had to leave. And she's my twin sister. And she's a twin sister. I have an aunt who's your twin. Yes, and I just have this feeling she's in trouble and she needs help. And I was just wondering, if maybe you would consider going to go see her. I don't even know this woman. So I know, but I just think she might be in trouble. And well, she's your aunt. He said, well, that's true. I guess she is my aunt, but I couldn't leave you. You'd be here by yourself. No, I've got a little set aside, and I'd be fine for a while. Where does she live? Oh, right at the edge of the world. So it'd take you a while. Anyways, this goes on for a bit, but they decide he'll go. So next morning, she gives him a bannock and blesses him on his way. And off he goes, and he walks for, quite a ways, and eventually goes down this little hill, crossing a bridge, and he sees this old woman with this huge bundle of sticks on her back. He's never seen such a big bundle. So he runs up and says, oh, there's a bundle that looks pretty heavy. She says, oh, yeah, and it's not getting any lighter. He said, well, how far are you going? He said, I'll help you carry some. And she said, oh, it's a couple of miles yet. He said, well, just give me the whole thing. And so he takes it, and off they go. And sure enough, there's this woman's house, and just piles of sticks everywhere. And he just thinks, well, everyone needs a hobby, I guess. And so he puts the sticks down and says, yeah, you really like sticks? And she says, oh, sticks are the best thing. Love collecting sticks. So I live for sticks. I mean, any kind of sticks. Shaggy stick, thorn stick, ash stick, hazel stick, oak stick. Any kind of stick is a good stick. Do you want to come in for tea? He's just like, well, you're crazy, but this is all right. I'm into it. First time away from home. So he comes in, and he tells the story, and she says, I see. And she reaches behind the door, and she takes the stick, and it's a big blackthorn stick, polished, dark like mahogany. And she says, you take this with you. And he says, I'm young. I don't need a walking stick. I'm not an old man. She said, well, no, you take it. This is a magic stick. This will be good for you. This will help you. If anyone, you ever get into, he said, no such thing as magic stick. But listen, you get in trouble, you just say, beat them stick, and you'll be glad you have it. So he doesn't want to offend her, and he thinks, well, long trip might not be bad to have a walking stick. He says, okay, I'll take it. I'll give it back to you when I come back. So she said, well, do you want to stay for supper? He said, don't you know I should, speaking of which, this is the most confusing thing coming to the UK. I have no idea what tea or supper or lunch or dinner mean. Everywhere I go, it's good. Do you want to come in for tea? And I sit down as a bowl of beef stew, and that's okay. That's not what I was expecting. Dinner at noon. Is that it? Anyways, she invites him to stay for whatever the evening meal will be, and he says, no, I should push on. So he goes and he walks away, and every night when he sleeps, he has the stick under, his bindle, and he just has the most beautiful dreams, and walks and walks. And eventually comes across a hazel grove, and he hears a commotion, maybe people having a little session in the woods. He's like, well, this will be good. It's getting dark. So he gets up. Sure enough, he sees these three people on horseback, and they're kind of noble people, and they're surrounded by these really rough-looking characters, just torn clothes, and they got axes and hoes and knives, and it's a stick-up. There's 50 of them. He's just like, this is not very fair at all. And he knows if he says anything, they'll kill him. So he just beat them stick, and well, sure, jumps out of his hand, flies through the air, cracks them on the head. They're lying there, broken heads, busted legs and busted arms, and they're either all on the ground or they've run away by the end of it. And he steps forward, picks up the stick, and the man in the center says, "That's you saved us." He said, "Well, mostly the stick, really." He said, "Well, that's a very clever stick you have." He said, "Will you come to the? Do you know who I am?" He's some nobleman. He said, "I'm the king. These are my guards. I want you to come meet my wife." So you scoop him up, ride him off to the castle, and when they get there, it's the most incredible castle he's ever seen. And I don't know if he's got a big list of castles he's comparing this to of where it ranks, but it's impressive. And the guards go off one way with the horse, and he takes Jack into the castle and gives him some of his best wine and food, and they sit and they talk for a few hours, and finally says, "So look." He said, "Yeah, what's your business?" And Jack tells him. And he says, I wanted to introduce you to my wife, but the thing is, she's actually sick. She's in bed. She's in bed for months. She can't sleep. Hasn't been able to sleep for months, and she's sick with it. You know how you get." Jack says, "Oh God, that's terrible. That's really awful. What happened?" He He said, well, I don't know. He said, but months ago, you see, my father had this fruit tree. It's in the rose garden. It's called the tree of life, the tree of health. If you eat from its fruit, you're always healthy. Yeah, you never get sick. But this boy, he just broke in and he stole one of the fruits, so I had to punish him. So I put him in the dungeon. And ever since then, he's, my wife can't sleep. And then the next day, the tree was completely withered and it hasn't recovered since. And Jack says, well, I don't know. I don't know anything about these things, but my aunt seems to know things about things. So maybe I'll ask her. And the king says, well, anything you could do would be great. So next day, king sends him off and gives him a horse, gives him go into the pantry, take whatever you need. Jack goes off, but it takes weeks, months to get there. And he stops here and there, do a little bit of work, get some food and lodging. And eventually he makes it to the end of the world. And he's riding up right there. There's the coast. There's a house. There's some hens and chickens and geese running around. And when he gets close enough, this woman comes out. It's his mother, He says, you're my mother. And she looks up and says, I'm not your mother. She says, no, but you're my mother's twin. This is crazy. You look exactly like her. I'm freaked out right now. And I'm Jack. I'm your nephew. And she says, oh my God, Jack, I always knew this day would come. And she's overjoyed and brings him in and he feeds him and they're catching up. And eventually it comes to why he's there. And she says, oh boy, the king would he'd give you anything to know the answer to that. You stay for a few days, though. Can you stay? I'm a lonely old woman at the edge of the world. You stay for 3 days. He said, I don't know if I could stay that long. So, well, you stay. I'll tell you anything you want. You stay. So, okay, I'll stay. So eventually the conversation comes. He says, well, she says, it's the king's fault, of course. And as anyone who's listening to the story clearly picked up, something about that boy, the timing, a little coincidental. The king didn't seem to notice. But it's unjust. It was unjust for him to do that to the boy. And the queen can't sleep because his sister is actually the girl who combs the queen's hair every night. And their mother, is into the dark arts as well. So she's tying knots in the queen's hair, so she can't sleep. And that night, too, before she left, she took a sword and she stuck it right under the tree. And that's it. So if you just pull it out, it will recover very quickly. But you have to release the boy, release the girl, pull out the sword. So Jack says, oh, thank you very much. Anyways, he goes back, eventually makes it to the castle. King's overjoyed to see him, pulls out all the stops, feeds him, wines him. And after a few hours, so did you find anything? And he says, oh, I did. I said, but you're going to have to promise me something. King says, anything. So, well, okay, it's your fault. What do you mean it's my fault? So, well, the boy, you threw him in that's what started this. So you have to release him. The king says, okay. I'll release him. So he can't be punished. You just got to send him home. I'll send him home. I promise. I swear. What about the queen? Why can't she sleep? Well, that's the sister of that boy. That's his sister, huh? Oh, I didn't know that was her sister. Yeah, and so she's been tying knots in the queen's hair. And that's why she can't sleep. I'll punish her. He's like, no, you see, didn't we just cover this seconds ago? You have a certain impulse to punish. You got to let her go too. Okay. He said, because if you don't, I don't tell you about the tree. All right. I swear to God. I promise. So they let them both go back to their mother. And that night, the queen has the first, probably weeping with relief. You know how it is when you're so tired and you finally sleep. It's the greatest thing you've ever felt. So releases them. And the next morning, the king says, so how about the tree? Jack says, oh, yeah, come out. And fishes ran out of the soil pretty quickly. There's this old rusty sword, pulls it out. And within minutes, the tree's blooming back to life. And the king wants to reward Jack, but Jack says, well, I don't even have anything to carry the gold with, I don't really need it. He said, well, I'll fill your pockets. He says, well, whatever. Go right ahead. And he leaves and, gives the stick back to the old woman, and he makes it back home, and his mother's alive and well and overjoyed to see him. And he tells her the same story that I just told you. And of course, he offered the stick back, but the stick woman said, you keep it. King might call on you again. So, anyways, I was going to do the short version, but that's the whole story.
Okay.
And to me, the thing that's striking about this story is the tree of life. We could imagine, that could be another way to imagine culture. I don't know if you've ever seen this where you see a picture of a lung and then a tree next to it, and it's the same. Mm-hmm. The dendritic kind of pattern, or a river, in a tree, or the placenta. Some cultures understood the placenta to be the tree of life because the same kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so then, not that I'm presuming to answer what the tree of life is, but I think there's an interesting question around not what is the tree of life, as if it's a noun. English is a very noun-based language in a lot of cultures, a lot of indigenous cultures, very verb-based.
Mm-hmm.
So another question to come to it would be, what does it do? What does the tree of life do? And it seems to me that the function of the tree of life would be it's that architecture which facilitates the flow of sustenance. And so feeding, basically. And so then what's the food in a community? Is goodwill. That's the fundamental thing to keep alive, the goodwill between us. And so anything that is a sword, a sword's just one. There's other stories with other things that can hurt the tree, but that's one of them. It's that impetus for revenge.
Mm-hmm.
Even though everyone needs that tree.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sure, the kings privatized it and sequestered it, but that tree is actually very important for the whole village. But when you're in rage, you did that to my brother. You put him in the dungeon. You bastard. Even though it hurts everyone. There goes the sword under the tree. Now everyone suffers. And so this to me becomes the thing is there's in I think it was in Ireland, often communities would literally form around a tree. They would find a tree, which they'd call the tree of life, and they build the community around the tree. But so the understanding was, I think even in this story, that tree was there before the kings were there.
Mm-hmm.
And the health of that tree, it's the thing that keeps the community well. You eat the fruit of that and you're well. When you eat the fruit of goodwill, everything is good between us. So you have to keep it alive. You have to protect it. You can't let it be damaged and withered in that way. So that's what has to be centered in all of these conflicts. And it's very easy to want to center the one who was hurt forever. But sometimes the one who was hurt wants to burn the whole thing down. And of course, in this culture, we're very big on centering the one who did the harm because they're often in a position of power. So, we think about the Me Too movement, Harvey Weinstein and Larry Nassar with the gymnastics and all this. It's very easy to want to center them, which is insanity. Oh, is this too much for you? Should we ease back on the accountability piece? We're so sorry. Of course you can't do that. But so then to me, what should be in the center is... or what is in the center when it's working well is that tree.
Yeah.
This is what we keep alive. This is what we work to sustain. And because the consequence to everyone of it being hurt, even though it can feel so satisfying to stick the sword under that tree, there's consequences to everyone, much beyond us, and for many generations to come.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That was an amazing story, Tad.
All right.
I enjoyed that immensely. It's like, where's he going with this? I mean, when you talk about culture, do you mean Western culture? Do you mean a global culture? Do you mean a region specific? I mean, what does...
That's a really good question. Yeah, I would make a distinction between civilization and culture. And this is something you might ask Stephen about because he can do a beautiful rendition of this. But yeah, I won't do his material on this one. But it's there is a difference. Civilization we could think of as you've got big cities at this point and roads galore and machineries coming in. This is civilization. Civilization literally as in the growth of cities. And cities, as Derek Jensen defines it as living together in a concentration high enough that you require the importation of resources. You've just outstripped your land base entirely, which is all cities basically.
Yeah.
And whereas culture is something more living, I think something about civilization is it becomes more rigid, whereas culture is still very alive. So I was saying earlier about with the residential school syndrome and how they would. There's this kind of administrative colonization where they say, oh, now you'll be the representative. But it was a very common thing and probably still is today with, existing indigenous cultures that have something still intact. If you were to say, who's your leader? It wouldn't make sense. Because there isn't one. Well, in times of war, probably this guy. The one who can speak best is her. She's real eloquent. The one who's best at healing conflicts, this guy, So it'd be different people nominated at different times with the intention of working yourself out of the job. Who wants the burden?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody sane wants that kind of responsibility. So you're called upon. Yeah, so culture to me is something a little more alive. And I don't know if there is such a thing or could be such a thing as global culture. You know, if we think about, let's say, culture in the soil. Well, if we were to find the soil in Japan and the soil in Canada and the soil here, there'd literally be different cultures. I mean, recognizable to each other in some way, but different. And again, they could literally just test your gut bacteria and they could tell you've been to Japan. Why? Because it's a different culture there. So this notion of global culture, there just isn't one. And what would it do? I mean, I don't even know because I'm no soil biologist. But what if we were to say, well, let's just inoculate all the soil in the world with the exact same strains of culture? I'm not convinced it would work for the plants over there. And then whose culture is the one that we're going to spread? You know, so by its nature, by definition, culture is such a varied something. It's so necessarily diverse, and even diverse. Each person's is unique. But certainly in a bioregion, in a geographic area, there'd be some discernible type of culture, and also amongst us as humans, there'd be some discernible kind of culture. And it to me, it's this thrust towards a global culture that is the culture ending thing. Because now there's nothing we could say culture as in life affirming, as in has the capacity to take your troubles and turn it into nutrition, which to me is such a beautiful notion when it hit me of, you know, so the same as if you don't eat, well, this culture dies. And so similarly, human culture, if nobody messes up, the culture doesn't have a chance. If you finally do something stupid and selfish and ignorant and hurtful, the culture is like, all right, finally get to work, man. We've been sitting on our ass for a while. We finally get a chance to be a culture, you know, or there's a big job to be done. Oh, finally. Yeah. There's some trouble. That's when culture has a chance to appear. But if we treat these troubles as, things to be gotten rid of. No. That's the food for this culture. I mean, wouldn't it be an amazing thing if you were having a conflict with a friend and everyone who's connected with both of you gathered around you and said, this is amazing. It's so beautiful. Because we haven't been together except that wedding, that funeral. Yes, last time we all saw each other. But now your conflict gets to be the occasion that we come together. This is our conflict. Well, last time I checked, your conflict is messing with our stuff. You know, we just had a party. Who do we invite? It's just tense as hell when you're both around. So no, this is not a privatized conflict. Nice try. It was a good attempt, but we're all here now and we'll be running the show. What the, you know, so we're going to hear from you both and, you know, they just get in your business. It would be wonderful. It would be a chance that people could actually become a culture again. Or, you know, but there is a plan B to all of this, to, you know, engaging those crucible moments, which is there's some pretty sweet new stuff on Netflix. So you can always watch that. Because, I mean, this stuff takes time to do it. And there's Game of Thrones that just finished up, and you could watch that all the way through. New Doctor Who's going to start next year, so... Yeah.
I've not watched really any of Game of Thrones, actually.
Me either. My goodness.
Yeah.
There's some shows that you just know they're too good. One of my friends, Kevin Gleese in Atlanta, with the Dad's Garage Theater Company, did improv with him for years, and he was always like, Tadsy, you got to watch The Wire. It's the best show ever. It's so well written. And I said, how many seasons is it? He's like, 7 or whatever. I said, no. But it's so good. I said, I know. That's why I'm staying away from it. It's too well written. I know if I start, I know my lack of self-control. I know. I mean, I got into House of Cards for a while, and I just literally when I knew the date it was coming out, all the evenings for the next 2 weeks, I just blocked off because it's going to happen anyways. Let's not kid ourselves that I'm going to restrain myself and just watch one a night. You know. Netflix with its seductive. Do you want us to just don't get up? We'll just we'll just play the other one. My friend Amber Nash is the voice of Pam in Archer, the animated. Oh wow! And so I heard about it. You know, there's a show and she's the voice, and it's an amazingly funny show, but it's only 20 minutes long. Oh, there was a few 4 a.m.s that discovered me. Because just one more. I just watched one more. Just one more. Oh, dear God, what have I done?
Yeah.
What have I done? So that's the plan B,
Yeah.
We could do that.
Oh, dear. You spoke earlier in the conversation, actually, and I just want to kind of pick up on this because I'm not sure that I've ever found a solution to this slight dilemma in my head, at least. So you have things like white privilege and, racism. So if you're a white male, which is perceived as being the sort of, I don't know how to say this without insulting people, but that's kind of like the lottery, because you're like, well, that's the, that's the sort of privileged archetype.
Yeah.
How are you supposed to feel as a result of that? Is that supposed to should you be guilty for the fact that you're a white male, or how are you meant to?
Well, and maybe how we feel might be a distraction. It might be another question to ask. What do we do? Because I feel that the options that are laid before white men these days, there's two. And maybe even before I say that, it's good to know there's an immense amount of privilege. Of course, and this will change over time. Whiteness entered the world at a point, it'll leave the world at a certain point. This is not a forever something.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a worthwhile question, I think, to ask. It's, are we there yet? Has white privilege ended? I don't think that's an illegitimate question.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we have.
Mm-hmm.
But so I'm coming from the premise that yes, being let's just keep it on the white thing. Getting to gender, there's a whole other set of considerations there. But let's just say, being a white person conveys upon you, or confers upon you, certain privileges, economic, social, political privileges, access to power, things you don't have to deal with because of the white piece.
Mm-hmm.
There's that. And that's a true thing. But what's also true is there are certain poverties that appear with the whiteness. Cultural and spiritual poverties. That, a lack of culture, to take it back to the culture thing. So many white people, it's this cultureless something, literally cultureless, because whiteness came into the world in the States in the, mid to late 1600s, when it was basically the elite Anglo white culture, and they were rebelled against. And the way that they dealt with the rebellion was a divide and conquer, and they took the indentured Europeans, offered them, access to the club of whiteness. But that wasn't offered to the enslaved Africans. It wasn't offered to the indigenous people, and it did work. It divided and conquered. So now everyone who looks like you and I would be considered white, North America and here. But it wasn't always that way. The Irish were not considered white. The Scottish were not considered white. The Poles, the Jews, the Ukrainians were not considered white. So instead of having a culture, you got whiteness. So it's an immensely corrosive thing, because now you don't have the stories, the song, the language. I mean, this part of whiteness is the English language, and saying, well, you want your Irish kids? I mean, they could starve and speak Gaelic. Come on. Send them to our schools. Give them a chance. And so a lot of parents did, as I imagine many of us would do today, if faced with, you want your kid to have a better life than you did, and you've been oppressed because of whatever marker you have. So, but, whatever was intended, cultures are just, gone. And so there's this poverty that's there. So I just think that's important to say when we enter into this conversation, because it's very easy to focus on the privilege, and the poverty gets often skipped over. But then, how are we supposed to feel? Well, there's two options that are given. One is, and I would just say, most white people don't even think about this. This isn't on their radar. They don't consider it. I mean, of course it's coming up, but it's just, this is not a big conversation. You go down to the local, Tesco. It's not like people, hey, Barry, I realized another privilege I have as a white person. Well, I disagree with that. I think privilege is no one's having these conversations. No. Or very few. But, okay, so let's say amongst the people that are starting to become aware that there's this thing called whiteness, one option is self-hatred.
Yeah.
And I say that's more on the progressive left activist side. And it's I don't think anyone's saying it, but it's there. You hear the jokes about white people, the belittlement of white people, and fair enough. And God, if I were in the position of people of color, indigenous people, I'd probably be making the same ones. And you've got young white people who are growing up in and spending time in those cultures, and there is a level of self-hatred that's appearing. So that's one option. Learn to hate yourself and everything that you came from, and you're just a colonizer, your empire. You know, I was speaking with a storyteller, Amy, in England. She lives in Bishop's Castle, and we were talking about this, and you know, she was expressing that for a lot of English people, there's a real shame around being English, because we're the English. Oh my God, we were the prime colonizer of the planet, without making the distinction between the English folk culture and the elite. And there's a very rich English folk culture. Anyways, so that's one option, though. Just hate yourself, as if this is some big moral achievement, self-hatred. The other one, self-glorification. And you can join the white nationalists, who will just say, hey, whoa. Why? Come on, white people have done a lot of good things for the world. I mean, look what the Industrial Revolution, that was white people. You know, and roads and transport, and that's valuable, and modern medicine. And I mean, of course, they vanish all the contributions of people of color in this. But that's the line that they give is, look what white people have given the world. So much. So there's a glorification. And I guess what I'm inviting is, instead of getting lost in either, because they're still both fundamentally a self-absorption, how about learning as an alternative? How about committing ourselves to just wondering, when did my ancestors become white? How recent was this? What were they before they were white? What did they have to give up to become white? How is it that white people are seen by people of color, indigenous people? Because there does seem to be something. If there wasn't, you know, Dave Chappelle, Chris Rock, a lot of their material would have to be cut. You know, not a lot, but there's a good chunk of that is commentary on white culture. So they're seeing something. There's something that's, you know, and you talk to indigenous people, fairly, when they talk about the white man, there's something they mean by this. So there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to see, and it doesn't require self-hatred. It's not helped by self-glorification, because then you've already made the decision. You already know everything. But how about just being willing to wonder, to be curious? You know, why is it when I say something, it gets this different reaction than when a person of color says it? What is going on? You know, why is it, like, I just don't get it. Why don't I understand what they're talking about? Or why do so many white people seem to disagree with people of color about their own experience? Like, what is going on here? Yeah. There's a lot to learn, and it's a noble thing to learn. But the enemy of learning is you know things already. You already got it dialed. Self-hatred. Yeah, I got it. I'm a sack of shit. Perfect. No learning required. And I see this a lot, honestly, in the progressive side. White people around racism, they don't wrestle with it. And I think they need to. They need to push back. Just not with people of color. With other white people that say, but no, this is stupid, and white privilege isn't real because of this, and things have changed, and what about white people being oppressed in this way? That's got to come out. You've got to be able to wrestle with these things to learn something. Because otherwise it just becomes a kind of obedience and a sort of towing a party line that you don't fully understand, which becomes very rigid. And then all you know what to do is what was on the checklist, your little activist checklist. And this isn't me besmirching activism, or God bless, you know, all the people who are out there in Extinction Rebellion, just and all, you know, all the good work out there. And it's there is something that I do see in the culture that tends towards that self-hatred. Yeah,
I think so. Yeah. Do you think people don't talk, as a sort of general rule, do you think people don't talk about this stuff because they're afraid to offend others, or do you think it's more the case that they're not even attuned to a frequency where it's on their mind?
I think it's the latter. Yeah. But I think there is a lot of fear, of course. And boy, you know, anyone who's actually tried to engage in these conversations, you learn quickly how volatile it is. Yeah. I've been a part of a number of conversations that just fell apart where the white people said, I will never do that again. And the people of color said,
Yeah.
I will never do that again
Yeah.
for their own reasons. So it's very difficult. I mean, some of the best conversations facilitated around this, there's a group in Atlanta called bepresent.org. And if anyone's just drawn to these conversations and want to figure out how to do it in a way that meets the crucible and goes through it to the other side, incredible work that they do. But a lot of their work is about slowing the conversation down. You know, that's one of the things they'll say often, just slow it up. What just happened in the group? Something that was skipped over. This thing, let's go back to that. Let's slow it down. You know, well, no, it was nothing. I would say, yeah, I just think, no, whoa. What was it? Well, I was just a little upset. I'm sobbing and, you know, crying. Okay, there we go. So there's so much emotion.
Yeah.
You know, God, if you're, you know, I remember I had some friends who facilitated summer camps for gang youth. And one of the things that they learned in their time doing it was the pain, the anger for these young Black and Latina kids. It's so intense, it's so volcanic. You can't touch it directly. They can't talk about it. It would explode. So they make art. That's the way to it. Let's make a mural. Then they'll do the ciphering, you know, where they'll get in a circle and freestyle rap. That's the way they come to it. Is you know, there's a lot of different versions of the Medusa story, but Martin Shaw, who's a storyteller from Devon, he has a beautiful rendering of it. You know, I think it was Perseus, and he's in the labyrinth. And God, forgive me, folklorist, if I butcher this one, but there's a moment where, you know, if you look at the Medusa, you're turned into stone. And I understand there's a certain way of looking at the Medusas. There's a more feminist rendering of this, but one way to come to this is that there's something about the Medusa. It's the horrors of the world. It's something so terrible. It's something so like what these youth have gone through. And if you look at it directly, it just turns you to ashes, turns you to stone. You just can't. There's a certain trauma. You know, it's genuinely overwhelming. You can't shake it by yourself. And if anyone, you know, is listening has gone through that, there's some things you go through or you witness that just change you forever because you witnessed it. You had direct contact with it. So what Perseus does, he has his shield and he looks at the reflection. So that's where he can see where she is without looking at her. And so that's what art can be, is that reflective surface where you don't look directly at the viciousness of the world, but you obliquely, you do it in that way. Or you put it through a prism. You know, there's the ugliness of the world. It's this intense, blinding light that casts all these shadows that we see. You know, we look at light as the New Age Light Brigade as if it's wonderful. But light is a blinding something too. Light is the shadow caster. If I shine a light in your eye, you can't see. You know, when the sun comes out, it hides the night sky. It pulls a blanket over the theater of the night. And so, but out of the other side of the prism comes a rainbow. And that can be the role of the artist, is the thing that would be too hard to see directly, it would blind you. Here's all the parts. And now we can look at it in a safer and different way.
It would be remiss of me not to mention your attire.
Oh, yes, sure.
What does it mean to you to wear a kilt?
Well, it's my grandfather's.
Is it really?
Yeah, I inherited it. So it means him. It means I come from somewhere. I come from someone. And I think about him whenever I put it on. So it's the Mackay tartan from, specifically up from Melness in Scotland, Tongue, that area. And he would have been the 11th hereditary chief of the Melness sept of the Clan Mackay, which is now given to my uncle Drew and then to his son Matthew if it continues that way. But yeah, so I think about him. And then this is a Ukrainian sash because my great-grandfather was a Greek Orthodox minister from the Ukraine.
Oh, wow.
This jean jacket is a badass jean jacket from the Kensington Market in Toronto. This vest is from the Portobello Market in London, just because I thought it looked good, but it was made from salvaged materials.
Cool.
And but mostly just got to look good. You got to look good, you know. You're gonna show up in the world. You got to look good because other people got to look at you. It's Just might as well give him something good to look at. Be beautiful.
We've mentioned, or you've mentioned Stephen Jenkins a couple of times in this. When did you first come across him, and what sort of influences he had on your life?
Boy, well, profound. It's 2012. I probably heard about him initially. A number of friends who said, "Well, Tad, you're into ancestry," and he is too. And I just didn't feel the draw. I felt a resistance in a way. But eventually things happened, and I sat down and watched the documentary Grief Walker, which I recommend to everyone, where it's about his work with the people who are dying in a hospital in Toronto, where he was the head of a counseling department and program. And it was so, I was so moved by it. It was so profound. And so then I decided, I'm going to sign up for this school he has, the Orphan Wisdom School. And it's, gosh, honestly, if I was going to say, if you were really lucky, if we were fortunate, it'd be him sitting here, not me. But he is going to be sitting here, so you are going to be that fortunate. I so much of even what I've said has been influenced by him and by spending time with him, and my capacity to see things in this way. For better or for worse, very influenced by him. Hopefully for the better. I think so. It's been there's so few people in the world who are willing to play this elder function, who are willing to take some stand for this tree of life in a time when it's so withered. And of course there's others, and God bless them, but there's so few. There's so few that I see in the world. There's a lot of old people, Michael Meade says, there are a lot of old people on drugs, but not a lot of elders giving out medicine. And there's a lot of people getting older, and it's still my turn. I'm still on the take. It's still about me. And so he's the one I met, who was one of the first older people I met, where it was, you're just not on the take. Of course I've met others. There've been amazing people I've met, but some resonance. Who knows why we're drawn to some people and, not drawn to other people. It's a mystery to me.
Some say it's like a soul connection, or, to do with your spirit. There's certain, it goes far deeper than just this material level.
Yeah, it certainly could be. I mean, it's all very properly mysterious. Yeah, I know some people drawn to some teachers, or not that Stephen, I think, would see himself as a teacher, or that I would hold him in that way, but he's just somebody who seems to be able to practice the skill of heartbrokenness in the world, and seems willing to move in a way of practicing culture making. And I'm so glad that he has, empowered by nobody. He's just a white guy from Ontario, from Scarborough. So it's I don't know what it would have cost him to do this. Probably a lot, in a culture where if you're a white dude, you're nobody. You don't come from anywhere, and what you come from is probably pretty bad in the more progressive scene. And so for him to be willing to, this is the way I think about Stephen. I was reading a book called this Hidden Life of Trees or something like this. Peter Vollenberg, an amazing book, but it talks about, I think it was birch trees, perhaps, and how when they grow, you get the older trees, and then around them you get the younger trees growing, and the younger trees have to make do with 3% of the light, because the leaves just so little gets through. And because of this, the cellular structure is very tightly packed in these trees, because it's all efficiency at that point. And you can imagine those younger trees looking at the bigger tree. I could be a bit better, bigger tree. Give me a chance. Get out of my way, old man. I'm sure there's this. And but eventually the older one does die, falls over a storm, something knocks it down, and then they grow. The younger ones, the ones that aren't taken out, when it falls down, but the younger ones grow. And because they grew so slowly, the cell structure was so tightly packed. They're very healthy trees. But, how do they keep alive with just 3% of the sunlight? Well, it's not just the sun that's feeding them. The roots of that tree has reached out and found them and is feeding them under the soil. This subterranean sugar that goes out is amazing. And it's teaching them, really, is one of the things in Peter Vollenberg's book is he comes across this as a stone or a circle of stones in a forest covered with moss. He's thinking, that's weird, stones in a circle like that. And he scrapes away the moss and he realizes it's wood. It's not stones. And he realized, he's looking at the a tree stump that's kind of rotted away. But then he scrapes at the wood and it's green. So it's alive. He says, how the hell is this being kept alive? Because it's covered with moss, there's no photosynthesis. And he realized they're being fed by the roots. Mm-hmm. But why would the other trees keep this old tree alive? And his what he postulated this for the memory. Because this has memory of different weather patterns and infestations and pests. And so it's still teaching, So it fed them their whole life, and now they're feeding it to keep it alive, and that the wisdom can stay in the world. And and if you take one of these birch trees, I think it's birch tree, you plant it in the middle of a field, let's say by a nice water supply, it grows real fast. But the cellular structure is real open, which creates these air pockets. And so at a certain point, when they're still pretty young, that's where the fungus gets in and they die. So it's the kind of, Rest Her Soul, Amy Winehouse and Kurt Cobain and the 27 Club you hear about.
Yeah.
They grow big and then they get taken out. Mm-hmm. No older tree to shade them and say, hey, you're getting a lot of that spotlight right now. Mm. And I know it seems to feel good. I know you want more of it, but this really isn't good for you to be overexposed like this. Mm-hmm. So you stay in my shade. And you know what? You resent me for a while. It's okay. That's part of the architecture. You're supposed to think you're going to, maybe you will do a better job. But for now, you let me take the heat because you think it's so good and easy to just be constantly exposed to the sun. But it's not, sometimes it's too hot. But then you'll be under my shade. It's better me than you. I can take it better than you can. And so that's how I think of Stephen.
So your relationship with him is like he's the big tree and you're one of it, really?
Oh, yeah.
So, but in what way were you different before meeting or, encountering him to how you are now?
Boy, that may take another whole interview to cover the gross series of my indiscretions of my indiscriminate youth. I don't know if I could even answer that. I would but I mean, for all the blunders I still make, and for all the trouble I still cause in the world, I didn't want to get old. I looked around, I saw almost no examples of older people that genuinely inspired me. I mean, old people up to good things, but some flavor was missing, or the burnouts at the bar, or it just wasn't anything I saw. And when I met him, it was the first time in my life I had a feeling of that, something like that. And so all of a sudden, I actually want to get older. Might I be granted the years to play some role of elder in the lives of younger people? And that was just, I had no desire for that before. No particular scent for it, no taste for it. In a culture, I just want to stay young forever. Keep doing that young person thing. Yeah.
What are the main things that you think that you gain from aging?
Well, probably the things the world has gained from my aging is, but that was it. Leonard Cohen has the line, he says, "I've been saved from desire by a blessed fatigue." Getting older. It's good not to have the same octane. Okay. It's a certain level of carousing and indiscretion is hard on the world and hard on the people in the world, and so it's I would say the world has probably benefited more than me, but of course I've benefited because that stuff is hard on the one doing it too.
Yeah. What's your relationship with death?
I'm still terrified of it.
Are you?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's yeah, I was almost killed by an accidental overdose years ago, and it was right there. And it's I mean, anyone who's been there, I imagine they have some sense of this. It's just, there's no words for it. It's shattering. It's so overwhelming. This thought of I could just vanish and disappear. I just stop. The light goes out and there's just nothing. Not even nothing, because that's a word for something, Oh, it was so, I've never felt so sad and scared. There's this mix of grief and fear. So yeah, that's still there for me. And I'm hoping to live my life in such a way and tend to the other deaths of those who die before me in such a way that I don't get to my deathbed with that as a regret. I'm at least hoping that. But I'm coming, I find myself opening to this, the animism of the world, that the world is alive, and that, that maybe there is something beyond this body. I don't know. I'm as baffled as anyone by this, but I find myself more open to that, and trying to live my life as if maybe that's true. That there's more than just my understanding of how it is. That there's a bigger story that I'm in, and that maybe my death can still feed something. That would be the hope, is that when I die, my manner of dying is my final gift to the world. Yeah, and who knows what comes after. Yeah.
Jeez. I've heard Stephen speak about near-death experiences and how that, and I think I'm correct in putting it this way, gave him an immense sense of gratitude for what he actually had and life itself. I mean,
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Yeah, there's every time I've been close to death on the other side of it, there was a thirst to be alive, to celebrate, to go out, to be in the world. Yeah, that's absolutely been my experience.
How happy are you as a person?
I don't know, that's a good question. Depends on the day you catch me.
Really?
I have a melancholy about me that I've never fully understood.
You have a melancholy about you.
Yeah. Yeah, there is some deep sadness in me that, I don't fully grasp.
See, I didn't know whether that was just your sort of natural disposition that you've adopted because it's, it's your thing, or whether that's your default mode.
Yeah, it's there a lot. Yeah, there is a kind of... Yeah. So
like, what is that? Like a sort of latent sadness?
I don't know. Yeah, it baffles me.
Is it like a depression?
I don't know if it's exactly that. No, I don't experience myself as being... I'm just I'm an immensely nostalgic dude. I miss people who are gone. I miss I miss a lot of things, I suppose. And there's a lot of joy in life too. Years of improv comedy, and this is in the mix too, but there's certainly that. And who knows, maybe I'll come to some deeper relationship and friendship with that over my life, because it's not all bad. It's a good terrain to understand and to know. Because I think if I didn't, when you come across somebody else who's very sad, you don't know how to be with it. It all turns, well, cheer up, chin up, everything will be okay. And I don't know, my favorite line around sadness comes from Stephen Moffat, Doctor Who writer. In the episode Blink, he says, sad is happy for deep people. So maybe there's something there too.
Sad is happy. Yeah. I mean, I've not met Stephen. Is he similar to you in that regard?
I don't know. You have to tell me after you spend some time with him. But I think hopefully it would be wonderful if over my life it shifts from a kind of sadness, about me and self-pity, which is certainly there, to a grief-informed understanding of life. And I can feel that growing. Grief is just, there's so many limits in this life and endings everywhere. And that's just woven in. But that's also the joy. That's where the love of life comes from. That's what underwrites the fact that it's the love, the intensity of the love is it's not going to last forever. It's going to go at some point. But here we are. We get to talk to each other now. We get to be we're alive. Still,
yeah.
It's amazing. It's not a given that I would be sitting here alive in this chair today, or that you would have made it to today. So, and there's so much in this culture, it's just all taken for granted.
Yeah. Yeah.
When my friend Olenka had her farewell party, a few people said, well, I know I'll see you again. I just looked at them and thought, oh, do you? You know you're going to make it home alive. You're so certain of this. And she's going to come back alive. Or she'll ever come back here, or you'll be here when she comes back. Yeah, but it just seems like grief is the thread that stitches it all together. There's that Latin line, the lacrimae rerum, the tears and everything. Because it's so beautiful, and it's passing. Yeah, and I don't mind. It's not that I would valorize feeling sad, but I would encourage the feeling more. And I think I've felt more since working with Stephen.
Wow. I just find that fascinating. Yeah. I don't know whether I try to avoid feeling sad because I don't particularly like it, or whether I'm just not that sad of a person. Or maybe I'm just not looking in the right place. Yeah.
Well, the ocean's got deep parts, it's got shallow parts, and
yeah,
it's all needed.
Yeah.
There's some people who just, it's not so deep, and thank God. You wouldn't want to hang out with someone like me all day, all the time. It's good to have those friends who are a little lighter and on the surface. I mean, God, sometimes I need those people. Thank God they're in the world. It's not, there's no better. It's not like deep is the real thing and shallow is the fake thing. That'd be like saying the deep part of the ocean is the real part and the shallow is the fake part. It's all needed.
I suppose it's, again, how do you define shallow and deep in that regard,
Well, some people like to explore a lot and think a lot. And, how is this connected? And where did this come from? And they just look at you and say, boy, you ask a lot of questions, huh?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, yeah.
I suppose I do that naturally as well. I'm like super inquisitive and stuff. But I tend to always maybe fall on the optimistic side of the coin, perhaps. It's really interesting, though. It's really interesting.
What time is it?
Time, we are about 20 to 7.
I've got to go.
Time?
It's time.
Okie dokie. Well, Tad, thanks so much for your
so
time,
much.
my friend. It's been, honestly, I've loved speaking with you. I always enjoy speaking with you, so you're welcome back when you're back in Edinburgh. And,
thank you so much.
I hope that we're both alive to make this happen once again.
Wouldn't that be something?
Okay, my buddy. Cheers.
Cheers.